My name is Daniel Rojas, and I'm going to tell you exactly when I stopped being the kind of cop who laughs at the word witch. It happened on November 2nd, de Muertos at almost 11 at night, when the radio sent me into a street that looked like someone had erased the people first and left the buildings behind as an afterthought. I can still taste the copper panic in my mouth when I remember it, and I can still hear it too. Nails on metal, slow at first, like someone taking their time because they know you don't have anywhere to go. If you're listening to this and your brain is already searching for a logical box to put it in: stress, concussion, a stray animal on a car roof, good. Mine did the same thing. That was my only defense for a while, a lie I could live inside. I kept telling myself it had to be something ordinary wearing an ugly mask, because the alternative meant the world had rules I didn't get to enforce. I had been transferred 2 weeks earlier to a district everyone in the station described with the same tired shrug. "You'll learn fast," they told me, and it wasn't encouragement. It was a warning that came with a handshake and a look that slid away before your eyes could catch it. The calls were constant, domestic violence that spilled into the street, neighbors screaming from behind barred windows, gangs that treated certain blocks like private property. I was young enough to believe a uniform still meant something everywhere. I was wrong in a way I didn't understand yet. My partner's name was Mateo Salazar. He'd been patrolling that area for years, the kind of officer who could calm down a raging drunk with 3 sentences and a steady hand on the shoulder. He knew the names of the old women who sold tamales in the mornings and the kids who ran messages for men with knives in their waistbands. He also knew the stories, and he told them the way some men talk about traffic patterns, not to entertain, but to keep you alive. One night, a few shifts before everything went bad, we were parked near an intersection where the streetlight flickered, like it couldn't decide whether it wanted to be useful. Mateo was sipping coffee that had been reheated too many times. The smell of burnt sugar from a bakery down the block, mixed with exhaust and something else, a faint sweetness I couldn't place. We watched a couple argue on a corner, a man waving his arms too close to a woman's face. "Las Cruces," Mateo said suddenly, like he'd heard a name I hadn't. I followed his gaze. The neighborhood boundary wasn't official, just a change in the way the street felt. Less noise, fewer porch lights, more blank windows. The air had a habit of going still there. "What about it?" I asked. Mateo didn't smile. "You don't go deep into Las Cruces alone because of gangs," I said, already thinking I knew the answer. Mateo tapped the steering wheel with his finger, steady, patient. "Because of her." I let out a short laugh before I could stop it. It wasn't mean, just automatic. "Her who?" "La Bruja de las Cruces," he said, and the way he spoke the words made them sound like a title, not a rumor. "They call her different names. Some call her Madrina, like she's a godmother, like she protects them." I leaned back in my seat. "Mateo, come on. You're new," he said, not offended, just stating a fact. "You still think the worst thing you can meet out there is a knife." I wanted to argue, but the couple on the corner started pushing each other, and we had work. Later that night, after we separated them and filled out paperwork that wouldn't fix anything, Mateo mentioned his old partner. The man had chased a suspect into Las Cruces despite warnings. Shots had been fired. Then a scream, Mateo said, a sound that didn't belong in any human throat. When Mateo found him, he was curled up like a child, digging his nails into his own cheeks, so hard blood ran down his wrists. The man quit within a week. He wouldn't talk about what he'd seen, and he wouldn't patrol any neighborhood again. He vanished into a life that didn't require him to drive down dark streets at night. "Trauma," I said then, because it was easy. Maybe he froze. Maybe he broke. Mateo looked at me like he was deciding whether you could survive the truth. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe he saw someone who doesn't like being watched." I kept my mouth shut after that. I didn't want to insult him. He was a good cop. But inside, I filed it away with other local myth stories people use to give their fear a shape. The problem with fear is that it hates being shapeless. It will wear anything if you hand it a costume. On November 2nd, Mateo called out sick. It wasn't dramatic. He texted me before my shift started. He said he couldn't keep food down, and his voice over the phone sounded like gravel. We were short-staffed. The sergeant looked at the schedule, looked at me, and said I'd run the patrol solo for the night. He said it like it was an inconvenience, not a risk. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I had already learned the streets. I told myself no one ever died from superstition. The city felt different that night. Not festive, exactly. The altars and apartment windows and the candles on stoops made the shadows deeper by contrast. Every so often I saw marigold petals scattered on sidewalks like someone had tried to mark a path and then thought better of it. Music drifted from a house with its door open, and for a moment the world looked almost warm. Then I turned a corner and the warmth disappeared like a light switched off. At around 11, dispatch called in a disturbance. The voice in my earpiece sounded clipped, too quick. They said it might be more than a simple robbery. They gave the location and told me other units were on the way. I acknowledged and drove, my hands resting easy on the wheel, my mind already rehearsing procedures. Siren off, lights low. That's how you approach when you don't want to announce yourself. The closer I got, the emptier the streets became. It wasn't the normal late-night emptiness where you still see a stray dog, still hear a television through a window. This was a vacuum. Even the air felt held, like someone had pressed pause on the world and forgotten to unpause it. When I turned onto the street dispatch had named, the first thing I noticed was that I didn't see anyone at all. No crowd, no broken glass, no shadows moving behind curtains. The buildings looked tired and old, as if they had been left to rot politely. The streetlights were on, but their glow didn't spread the way it should. It just pooled in weak circles and stopped. I radioed dispatch, Unit 12 on scene. I don't see. That's when I saw her. At first I thought it was a person walking toward me from the far end of the street. A woman, by the shape of her shoulders, a long dress, a rebozo wrapped around her head and upper body. She moved slowly, and I felt my throat loosen a little, because a person, any person, gave the street a normal reason to exist. Then my brain caught up to what my eyes were seeing. She was getting closer, but I couldn't see her feet move. The hem of her dress didn't swing or brush the ground. It hovered. It wasn't that she was gliding like in a movie. It was worse because it was subtle, like my mind kept trying to force her into the physics it understood, and she kept slipping through. I stopped talking mid-sentence. My fingers tightened around the radio. The dispatcher said my call sign again, asking for confirmation, but my mouth didn't work. I flicked on my brighter lights, telling myself it was just the angle, just the shadows. Headlights flatten things. Headlights lie. The stronger light didn't change her. It didn't make her squint. It didn't make her turn her face away. It only made one detail painfully clear. The dark shape of her eyes beneath the cloth was aimed directly at my windshield. She kept coming. In my head, I searched for explanations like a man searching his pockets for his keys. A trick of light. Someone on a skateboard hidden under the dress. A homeless woman drifting. High, slow, anything. The simplest lie was the one that nearly got me killed. I told myself to wait just a second longer, to see her up close, to confirm what I thought I was seeing, so I could laugh at myself after. She tilted her head, just a fraction, as if she'd heard that thought. Then she moved. The distance between us collapsed. She didn't run. She didn't sprint. She just wasn't far anymore. Cold pressed through the windshield as if the glass had turned thin. The hair on my arms stood up. My stomach dropped like I'd missed a step on a staircase. I jerked the cruiser into reverse. The tires squealed. The car rolled backward, and relief flashed through me, bright and stupid, until something hit the roof with a heavy, solid thump that made the whole frame shudder. For a split second, my mind tried to put an animal there. A cat, a dog, something that could jump, something alive. That lie lasted exactly as long as it took for the sound to start. Scratch, not a quick scrape, not claws skittering. A slow, deliberate drag that traveled across the roof like a blade drawn along metal. Then another, faster, angrier. The roof buckled in and out under the pressure. The windshield vibrated. I could see the shadow of her above me, stretched and wrong, like a puppet crawling along the top of the car. The scratches moved toward the edge of the roof, toward the glass. A sound came from her, and it wasn't a scream the way you imagine screaming. It was a ripping noise, thin and high, like tearing cloth. It made my teeth ache. I slammed the accelerator, still in reverse, trying to create distance. The car lurched backward faster, but the weight stayed on the roof as if it were strapped there. The scratching hit the windshield, and for an instant, the glass caught the lines of it thin, pale scars forming under the streetlight. The sound shifted to the side windows, and I saw the first spiderweb crack bloom at the corner. I realized something then that chilled me more than the cold. Whatever was on my roof wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to get in. I kept reversing, my eyes darting between mirrors and the street behind me. But the street had narrowed. Parked cars lined both sides. Trash bins waited at the curb like obstacles placed deliberately. My hands were slick on the wheel. My brain screamed at me to drive forward, to spin out, to do anything but continue backing into a trap. But panic makes decisions for you when it wants. The scratching became frantic. The roof shook. The whole cruiser sounded like it was being torn apart one seam at a time. Then my rear tires clipped something hard. The cruiser fishtailed. My shoulder slammed against the door. My vision blurred, and the next heartbeat was nothing but impact. Metal screamed. Glass exploded into tiny stars. The world snapped sideways. For a moment, I wasn't fully unconscious. I was stuck in a dark pocket between waking and blackness, and in that pocket I could still hear the nails on the roof. Slow again, almost satisfied, like she had all the time in the world because she knew I couldn't run anymore. When I woke, I was on a stretcher with an EMT shining a light in my eyes. My skull throbbed. My tongue tasted like blood. Someone was asking my name, my badge number, if I knew where I was. A second officer stood nearby, face tense. I tried to sit up, but a hand pushed me back down. She was on the roof, I said, and it came out hoarse. She didn't have feet. The officer's eyebrows twitched in a way that wasn't disbelief so much as resignation. He nodded once, like he was dealing with the predictable aftermath of a crash. "You're concussed," he said. "Save it for the report." They took me to the hospital. The doctor used words like mild traumatic brain injury, adrenaline, shock. She told me hallucinations could happen after accidents. She told me to rest, to drink water to avoid alcohol, to come back if symptoms worsened. I asked about the street. I asked if they found anyone. They told me the disturbance call was being investigated, but the scene was empty when units arrived. No suspects, no victims, nothing. Nothing except my cruiser, which they towed back. The next day, still dizzy, I went to the impound lot with my sergeant and 2 other officers. I needed to see it. I needed the metal to tell me I hadn't invented the night. The roof had dents 2 deep impressions near the center, like knees or fists had hammered down. The side windows were scored with thin lines that caught the light when you moved your head. The paint near the top edge was peeled away in strips. I stood there staring until my sergeant clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Wild night, huh? You're lucky." The word felt like a joke with sharp edges. That evening, they sent me home with a few days off. Mateo called to check in, still sick. I told him what happened, leaving out nothing. There was a long silence on the other end. "You went near Las Cruces," he said finally, not as a question. "It was a call," I replied, and my voice cracked with frustration. "It was my job." Mateo exhaled. "The street doesn't care about your job." I wanted to snap at him. I wanted to tell him his stories had gotten into my head. Instead, I said, "So what was that?" Mateo's voice dropped. "Her. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard nails on metal. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, patient, like someone tapping a code that only my bones could translate. By the second night home, I started to notice things that didn't fit. It began small, the way a crack begins in concrete. My bank account didn't add up. I had always been careful. I was the kind of person who knew exactly what was in his wallet. I checked my transactions. No strange charges, no withdrawals. The numbers were simply wrong, as if someone had reached into the account and scooped out handfuls without leaving fingerprints. I told myself it was a bank error and made a note to call. Then the smell came. At first, it was just a hint when I opened the front door, something sour, like old trash. I took the bag out, cleaned the kitchen, opened windows. The smell returned within hours, thicker, sweeter in the worst way, like something dead and warm. It seeped into my clothes. It clung to my hair after showers. I cleaned harder. I scrubbed the floor until my knees ached. I checked the fridge, the drains, the trash bin outside. I crawled under the house with a flashlight, looking for a dead rat, a broken pipe, anything. I found nothing. The smell didn't leave. On the third day, bruises appeared on my back. I didn't notice them until I was changing my shirt. Dark blotches, finger-shaped. I touched them and winced. They weren't old bruises from the crash. They looked fresh. At the clinic, the nurse frowned and asked if I had fallen. I told her about the accident. The doctor ordered blood work. When the results came back, they said my iron was slightly low. They gave me vitamins. They told me stress could cause strange symptoms. I wanted to believe that. Stress is real. Stress kills people slowly. It's a monster you can explain. But that night, while I stood in my kitchen swallowing iron pills, I noticed the plant on my windowsill drooping. I had kept it alive for months without thinking about it. The leaves were curling inward, like hands closing. 2 days later it was dead, the soil dry and hard, no matter how much I watered. Then another plant browned overnight. Then the small herbs I kept by the sink. It wasn't normal. It was like something in the house was drinking the life out of anything green. On the 5th night, I saw her in my yard. I wasn't looking. I wasn't expecting anything. I was just standing near the window because the smell had grown strong enough to make my stomach turn. Outside, under the dim orange of the streetlight, a shape stood near my fence. A woman in a long dress, wrapped in a shawl, facing my house. My heart stuttered. My breath stopped. I stared until my eyes burned. She didn't move. She didn't wave. She didn't threaten. She just existed there, like a fact I wasn't allowed to deny anymore. I stepped onto my porch, my bare feet cold on the concrete. I didn't have my gun. I didn't think about it. I just wanted to see her clearly, to prove to myself she was real. The moment I leaned forward, she wasn't there, not walking away, not slipping behind a tree, gone as if she had never been. I stood on the porch shaking, my skin tight with fear. In my mind, the logical explanation rose like a drowning man's last breath. A woman passing by, someone's aunt, a trick of the light. But the smell behind me in the house deepened, and I knew the lie was thin. That's when I called Mateo and asked him to come over. He arrived pale, still recovering, and he didn't make jokes. He walked into my house like he was entering a room where someone might be listening. He sniffed the air, grimaced, and asked me to show him the bruises. When I lifted my shirt, his face hardened. "That's not a vitamin problem," he said. "You think she's doing this," I replied, and my voice had the bitterness of a man trapped. Mateo nodded once. "And you're going to think I'm crazy, but I already saw her," I cut in. "Just tell me what to do." Mateo went quiet for a beat. Then he said, "Salt." I almost laughed. The word sounded too simple, too domestic, like a cooking ingredient, could fight something that could jump onto a moving car. Mateo didn't blink. "Coarse salt," he said. "A line around your house. No gaps. It's not a cure. It's a boundary." "A boundary," I repeated, and the word made me angry because boundaries were my job. I was supposed to be the boundary. Mateo looked at me like he understood. Some things respect lines more than laws. I drove to a store and bought a heavy bag of salt. I came back, and as the sun slipped down, I walked the perimeter of my house and poured it in a thick trail. The grains caught the fading light. They looked like a pale scar around my home. When I finished, I stood on my porch and waited. The air felt taut, like the moment before thunder. That night, she didn't appear in my yard. For the first time in days, I let myself believe I had done something right. I ate a few bites of food. I took a shower. I lay down and listened to the silence. No nails, no whisper, no movement outside. I slept. The pain woke me like a punch. It started as a sharp ache between my shoulder blades, then spread into burning spikes, as if something had sunk into my flesh and twisted. I gasped, rolled, and my hand slapped against wetness. The smell hit me at the same time, stronger than ever, a rotten sweetness that made bile rise in my throat. I stumbled to the bathroom, flicked on the light, and twisted my back toward the mirror. There were bite marks, perfect impressions of teeth, deep enough that the skin around them swelled. The marks were dark, already angry and inflamed, like the wound had been there longer than it had. The edges looked too clean, too deliberate, as if whoever did it wanted me to see. I pressed my fingers around the bites and hissed. The pain was real. The blood was real. The smell was real. I drove to urgent care with my shirt stuck to my back. The doctor's face tightened when he saw it. He asked if I'd been attacked by an animal. I lied and said it happened in a fight. He didn't believe me, but he cleaned the wound, swabbed it, and gave me antibiotics. "It's infected," he said, frowning. "You should have come sooner." "It happened tonight," I whispered. He looked at me like I was either lying or insane. He didn't argue. He just wrote prescriptions and sent me away with the kind of pity that burns. Back home, I stood at my front door and stared at the salt line. It was intact, thick, unbroken. My stomach turned cold. If the salt kept her outside, then whatever bit me didn't need to come in from the yard. That thought was worse than the pain. Mateo came over the next day. I showed him the bites. He muttered a prayer under his breath, the kind of prayer men pretend they don't remember until they need it. He told me we needed help beyond salt. "A Brugo?" I asked, and I hated myself for how desperate I sounded. Mateo nodded. "Someone who knows how to deal with her." I went to the first Brugo on a neighbor's recommendation. The man had candles on a shelf and a smell of herbs that made my eyes water. He listened while I spoke. He looked at my back. He shook his head. "There's nothing spiritual on you," he said, bored. "Go to a doctor." I wanted to grab him by the collar and show him the teeth marks. I wanted to demand he explain the smell in my walls, the money that disappeared, the plants that died. Instead, I walked out, the humiliation burning hotter than fear. The second Brujo was further away, in a cramped apartment where saints stared down from every corner. He waved smoke around me, muttered words I couldn't follow, then frowned like a man reading a blank page. "No," he said. "You're sick, not cursed." The third told me I was wasting his time. With each rejection, my hope narrowed. I started to feel not hunted, but abandoned by the world I lived in. I was a police officer. I was supposed to be the person people called when they were afraid. Now I was the one afraid, and no one would meet my eyes long enough to admit why. Meanwhile, the curse, if that's what it was, tightened. The money vanished faster. I started paying bills in cash because I didn't trust numbers anymore. The smell in the house moved. One day it was strongest near the kitchen, the next near the hallway. It was like something was walking through the walls, dragging rot behind it. The bruises multiplied again. My back looked like someone had beaten me with careful hands. The bites didn't heal. The antibiotics slowed the swelling but didn't stop the infection. The skin stayed angry and discolored, as if my body couldn't decide whether it was allowed to close. And at night, she came closer. At first she had stood near the fence, then near the sidewalk, then at the edge of my yard, always silent, always facing my house. The worst part was that she didn't need to attack me in the street anymore. She was teaching me something, that my life had become a place she could visit whenever she wanted. I called Mateo again and told him I couldn't do this anymore. I told him I felt like I was dissolving. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, "I know someone. He's not close." He didn't give me the name over the phone. He told me to meet him at the station parking lot at dawn. He drove, and I followed, the sun rising pale and weak behind us, like it didn't want to watch. We traveled out of the city, out of the noise, into long stretches of road where the world looked normal again. That normality should have comforted me. Instead, it made me feel like I was leaving one reality for another, crossing a line I couldn't uncross. The man we met lived in a small house on the edge of dry land. No sign, no dramatic display, just a garden that, strangely, looked alive. Green leaves in a place that should have been dust. Mateo greeted him with respect. "Donna Franan," Mateo said. The old man studied me without asking my name. His eyes moved over me the way a doctor's eyes move over a patient, not judgment, just assessment. He watched my breathing. He watched how I held my shoulders. He looked at my hands like he expected to find something there. "You don't sleep," he said finally. I swallowed. "Not much." "You don't eat," he continued. I didn't answer because the truth was I had been living on coffee and fear. Donofrian nodded like I'd confirmed what he already knew. "Show me," he said. I turned my back and lifted my shirt. He didn't touch the bites. He leaned close, sniffed once, and his face hardened in a way that told me he wasn't pretending anymore. "You went where you shouldn't," he said. "It was a call," I replied, and my voice cracked with anger. "I didn't choose it." Donofrian looked at me, and for the first time I felt small, not because he was powerful, because he was certain. "The street chose you," he said, "and you accepted by entering." Matteo stood to the side, silent, his jaw tight. "What is she?" I asked. "A woman, a spirit, a gang's trick?" Donofrian's gaze didn't soften. "She is what people feed when they are afraid. She is what people pay when they want protection without consequences. She is older than your badge and stronger than your disbelief." I tried to force logic into the conversation. "So stop her. Break it. Whatever she did, undo it." Donofrian exhaled slowly through his nose. "You want a clean ending," he said. "A victory. That's how your world works. Mine doesn't." He walked around behind me, still not touching, and spoke like a man delivering a sentence. "You made someone powerful angry, not because you intended harm, because you entered a place where your uniform is an insult." "How long do I have?" I asked, and I hated myself for needing the question. Donofrian paused only a moment. "Not long," he said, "if you keep living like nothing changed." My stomach dropped. Matteo's eyes flickered to me, and I saw the fear he'd been carrying since the beginning. He had always believed. He had just hoped I would never have to. Donofrian continued. "The presence is tied to your house now. It follows your door. It knows your rooms. You can run to another place, and it will learn that place too, because you have already been marked." Marked, the word sat heavy in my throat. "So what do I do?" I asked. Donofrian opened a small box and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were simple objects, a woven cord, a small charm made of dark material, and something that smelled faintly of smoke and bitter herbs. "No glamour, no theater. This won't free you," he said, and the bluntness of it hit me harder than any curse. "But it will protect you enough to sleep, enough to stand upright, enough to keep you alive." He tied the cord around my wrist with practiced fingers. The charm rested against my skin, cool at first, then warming like it was drawing heat from me. He murmured words so low I couldn't catch them. I felt foolish, standing there with a bracelet like a child. Then he looked at me straight on and said, "Understand this. The protection fades. The thing pursuing you is strong. You will have to return and renew it again and again." "How often?" I asked. "When it begins to fail," he replied. "You'll know." The certainty in his voice made my blood run cold. I imagined living by that schedule, waiting for the first sign, the first scratch, the first bruise, then driving back here like a man refilling oxygen. "And if I don't?" I said. Donofrian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Then you die," he said, simply. I stood there unable to breathe, and in that silence, he added the final detail like a blade sliding in. "You will not have children," he said. The sentence shocked me so much it almost made me laugh. It felt unrelated, absurd, like a superstition on top of another superstition. "What does that have to do with anything?" I demanded. Donofrian's eyes didn't blink. "Because what hunts you doesn't only punish you," he said. "It punishes what belongs to you. Blood is a path. A child is an open door." Matteo swallowed hard. I saw his hands clench at his sides. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell Donofrian he was exaggerating to keep me coming back, but my back throbbed with teeth marks that medicine couldn't explain. My house smelled like death with no source. My money vanished like it was being scooped out of my life. The argument died in my throat. We drove back in silence. The charm on my wrist felt heavier with every mile, as if the future had condensed into that small object. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept more than an hour. Not deeply, not peacefully, but enough that my body stopped shaking. The smell in my house eased. The bruises didn't spread. The bite wounds stopped weeping. I went back to work after my medical leave, moving carefully, smiling at coworkers who asked how I was. I told them physical therapy was helping. I told them the headaches were fading. I told them what they wanted to hear, because the truth would have sounded like madness. For a while, I lived in a fragile version of normal. The yard stayed empty. The nights stayed quiet. The scratches in my memory dulled. I started to believe in the way people believe when they need to survive, that maybe Don Ephraim had done more than he admitted. Maybe the protection had scared her off. Maybe I could move on. That hope lasted until the first time the charm weakened. It didn't announce itself with lightning. It arrived the way rot arrives, quietly in the background, until suddenly everything smells wrong again. I noticed it with my plants first. A new one I had bought, a stubborn little thing, began to droop. Then the smell returned in the hallway, faint but unmistakable, like a warning breath. Then my bank account dipped, even though I had been careful, even though I had changed passwords and checked statements. And one evening, standing in my kitchen, I realized the charm on my wrist felt different. Not warmer, not heavier, simply dull, like a dead battery. I stared at it, a chill crawling up my arms. Don Ephraim had said I would know. He was right. That night, I didn't turn off the lights. I didn't play music. I didn't try to distract myself. I sat in the living room with my back against a wall and I listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, from somewhere outside, I heard a sound that made my throat close. Scratch, not loud, not violent, just the beginning of it. I stood and moved to the window without thinking. The yard was empty. The street light flickered. The air looked calm. Scratch again, closer, and this time I understood something that made my stomach drop. It wasn't on my roof, not on my fence, not on the outside of my house. It was inside the walls. The sound traveled through the plaster like a finger dragging along bone. Slow, patient. Testing. I backed away from the window, my breath shallow. My mind screamed at me to call Mateo, to call Don Ephraim, to call anyone. I grabbed my phone. No signal. The bars were there, full, mocking, but every attempt to call failed. The screen flashed and returned to silence, as if the network itself had been cut off from me. I tried again. Same result. Scratch. The sound moved to the hallway. I could tell by the way it echoed, by the way the house seemed to hold it and amplify it. My mouth went dry. My palms sweated. Then the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was worse, because it felt like waiting. A soft knock came from my bedroom door. 3 taps, polite, almost careful. I stared at the door as if my eyes could burn through it. No one should have been inside my house. No one. My hand drifted toward my gun on the table, but it felt useless. A gun is for bodies. A gun is for threats that obey distance. The doorknob didn't turn. The door didn't open. Instead, a voice slipped through the gap beneath it, smooth and low, like someone speaking close to your ear in a crowded room. Daniel, it said. It wasn't Mateo's voice. It wasn't a neighbor's. It wasn't anyone I knew, and yet it said my name the way a mother says a child's name when the child belongs to her. My blood turned to ice. My lungs refused to fill. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The voice breathed out something like a chuckle. Good, it whispered, pleased. You learned not to invite. My skin crawled because I understood the implication. It didn't need permission now. It only wanted to hear me speak to see if I would obey. Then the nails returned, dragging down the inside of the door in one long, deliberate scrape. The sound made my teeth ache. The wood groaned. A pale line appeared through the paint, fresh and deep. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall behind me. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I held my breath and stared, my whole body a locked trap. The voice softened. You thought your line of salt was a wall, it murmured. It was only a lesson. The words were Spanish, but my mind heard them in meaning more than language. A lesson training, ownership. The silence that followed stretched so long my legs began to tremble from standing still. Eventually the pressure eased, like a storm drifting away. The air warmed by a single degree. The smell faded a fraction. I didn't sleep. I waited for dawn with my back against the wall, my gun untouched, my heart beating in a steady, terrified rhythm. When the first light came, I drove straight to Don Ephraim's house without stopping. without eating, without speaking to anyone. The road blurred. My hands shook on the wheel. I kept checking the mirror, expecting to see a shawl-wrapped figure sitting in the back seat like a passenger. Donafrayan opened his door before I knocked, as if he'd been expecting me. He took one look at my face and reached for my wrist. "It's fading," he said. I nodded because my throat wouldn't work. He untied the old cord and replaced it with a new one, his fingers quick and sure. The charm warmed again, like a small pulse of life against my skin. "How long until it fails again?" I asked, and the question sounded like surrender. Don Ephraim didn't hesitate. "As long as it wants," he replied. I stared at him, rage rising. "So I'm just supposed to live like this forever?" Don Ephraim's gaze held mine, calm and heavy. "You are alive," he said. "That is not nothing." The cruelty of it was that he was right. I had wanted a clean ending, a report filed, a case closed. Instead, I had a maintenance plan for my own survival. I left his house with the charm warm on my wrist and the warning colder than ever in my bones. On the drive back, the city skyline appeared like a promise of normal life, and I realized I would never fully enter normal life again. Not the way I used to. I would always carry a private set of rules. Don't go into Las Cruces. Don't speak to the voice. Don't trust the silence. Don't let the charm die. Most of all, don't bring a child into a life that something else has already claimed. Years have passed since that night. My job changed. My assignments shifted. I learned to avoid certain streets the way you avoid open flames. I learned to keep my life small, controlled, quiet. The charm still sits on my wrist, replaced and renewed as needed. Sometimes months go by without a sign, and the hope creeps back in, thin and tempting. Then a bruise appears where it shouldn't, or the smell slips into a room like a hand under a door, or I hear faintly in the distance the soft beginning of nails on metal. When that happens, I don't argue with my mind anymore. I don't try to explain it away. I don't tell myself it's the wind or an animal or stress. I call Don Ephraim. I drive the long road. I renew the cord. I keep breathing. I've never gone back to that street on November 2nd. I've never asked dispatch why the call sent me there. I've never found the suspect that didn't exist. I've never gotten an answer that would make the world feel fair again. I've only learned this. Some territories aren't guarded by gangs, but by agreements older than any badge. And stepping over the line doesn't start a fight you can win. There are nights when I lie awake and imagine a future I was warned not to build. A child's laugh in my hallway, a small bedroom with toys on the floor, a life that feels ordinary. The thought is tender in a way that hurts because it comes with a shadow attached. The idea of that voice learning a new name. If you take anything from what happened to me, let it be this. You don't have to believe in a curse for a curse to find you. Belief is not the price. The price is proximity. And if you ever hear nails on metal outside your window on a night when the street should be quiet, don't rush to look. Don't open the door. Don't call out. Don't offer your voice like a key, because the most brutal truth isn't that something followed me home. It's that it taught me how easy it is to become property. And the last thing Don Ephraim told me, the last thing I'll ever repeat out loud, is the only warning I trust completely now. If you ever hear that scratching come from a room where an innocent sleeps, run without shoes, run without pride, run without turning back, because that's the moment you'll learn it was never trying to kill you first. It was waiting for you to create something unprotected enough to take.